Right, so I'm Greg Swaysland. I'm a Purple Space Ambassador and Disability Network Co-Chair for my organisation, Bouygues Energies and Services. But before I was a construction project manager, I had spent 16 years in the Royal Navy, where I'd actually joined from the age of 16. Now, where most people might think the military is quite a harsh environment, which it is actually, we were one support network, and I will certainly touch on that certainly a little bit later. But at the moment, I've just completed my MSc in psychology, but for the past 5 years, I have actually been losing my eyesight. So how I've got involved in the whole sort of, I guess, disability kind of arenas through, I guess, personal experience. Now, I will apologise in advance when I sort of talk to you lovely people afterwards for potentially invading your personal space as I try and read your name badges, because I won't be able to see them. So, you know, please forgive me if I get a little bit too close. Okay, so, but what is Purple Space? We are all about disability confidence, and essentially the organisation was set up by Kate Nash to pull together employee resource groups or disability employee networks, DENs, and start kind of like a larger collaboration piece, sharing the best practices, looking at what different organisations were doing, looking at the lessons learned, really, and then bringing it all together into a central hub, so people will share their own stories, people will actually talk about what they're doing in their organisations, and every month, even this changed over the last 2.5 years since I've been involved with Purple Space, where you would have had sort of an event every sort of couple of months, but there's now something going on every day, every week, and there is something there for everybody. I guess one of the unique things about this particular space is that, you know, everyone is different. There are no sort of two conditions, two situations the same. So where you might look at sort of best practice in one sense is somewhat of a template, there is something there for everybody, and it is a peer-to-peer support group, and it's growing. You know, we've started in London, we're now going to the UK, and now it's going globally. You know, today for the International Day for People with Disabilities, there's the Purple Light Up, which is now, that is the global reach of sort of this particular sort of network, and it's only going to get bigger, really, and that's a positive thing. So the experience with hundreds of people who are members, Kate Nash's previous experience, and she sits on the board with the Business Disability Forum, a very well connected lady, and she's using them connections by also connecting other people, and yeah, that's pretty much what Purple Space, you know, it is driving change through helping other people certainly collaborate. So what are the values and benefits of DENs and ERGs? Now, they start conversations.
Sorry, can you say what DENs and ERGs are?
Okay, so DENs is a Disability Employment Network. I only found out about what that meant about 2 or 3 weeks ago. But you know, much like the thing that you would build yourself or with a child, they are actually, to be fair, they actually give people a real sort of safe place for them to kind of express themselves. You know, I think the sources of peer-to-peer support are absolutely key. You know, and when I talk about my journey certainly later, they are certainly a place to sort of relieve, you know, your own sort of concerns, and that's where it is access to the voices of the lived experience. You know, the more people sort of that get together, you know, in terms of starting conversations, that's where you start to see the driving of change. You'll be able to start seeing the mapping of where the issues are across an organisation, and then you can start looking at, okay, these are the facts, the data around actually how we can certainly help people. And I think one of the earliest things which saw the benefits of like employment networks were things like such as reasonable adjustments in the return to work after, you know, sort of post maternity, and now workplace adjustments for people with different conditions. These are all things that are born out of really sort of movements within organisations and people just having the conversations to begin with. So other than drivers of change, they promote diversity in the business. That is basically what Karen alluded to earlier, and really it promotes the business. If a business is seen as being inclusive, diverse, then actually it's going to be an attractive place for people to work. People are going to say, oh God, yeah, that's the sort of place that I want to go work. If it hasn't got a particularly good reputation, then they might walk in the door and find themselves somewhere sort of different. And really, they can be started by anybody. And that's the beauty about an employment resource group. If you want to start it for whatever reason, you can start it. You might have something like World of Warcraft or something, but there is going to be something there for everybody. But the research, actually, the statistics on research are somewhat. There hasn't been a great deal of research, but one of the things it has found is millennials are really getting involved, and that's, one sense, a good thing, because they are essentially the next generation of leaders, and if they believe in employment resource groups, then they are going to be, pioneering the change and actually carrying that change for diversity through to the leadership roles which they should be occupying moving forward. Also, as I mentioned earlier, it's going global. You've got employment resource groups in America, it's grown in Europe, and actually part of the Purple Light Up, there's going to be places being illuminated in places like Japan and Australia. So it is a real sort of a good sort of movement which actually there has been research into. However, conversely to the age and the millennials, actually older people are not really necessarily getting involved with networks and don't really see the point, which is slightly sad, but the research didn't really, I guess, assess things like the context. People who are of a certain age might actually have other things going on, other dependencies, so there's nothing really to sort of support the reasons why people of a certain age don't necessarily get involved. But one of the other constraints that employment resource groups actually have is budget. Now, that will also depend on the size of an organisation and essentially the strategic alignment of what it is that organisation does. Now, progressive organisations like Fujitsu, Barclays, PwC, who are in very sort of client-facing roles. So there's a lot of benefits, because there's actually a lot of things that they can also upsell as well as the customer experience. But again, with the budgets, and it's going to come on to the next slide, which is the challenges of employee networks, is that they can be competitive. Now, this year, which marks the 100th year of the suffragettes movement, there has been a lot of drive for women in work, and I completely understand why, and it is it should be celebrated, and how far women have come in the workplace. But I thought, if I talk from my own personal experience, it's kind of a lot of the other networks within the organisations have actually kind of been sort of pushed to the side. So sometimes, if they're like Fujitsu's got a great model where there seems to be a good structure, networks work together, but if it's badly set up, then they will become competitive, and if there is a limited budget, it becomes then even more certainly competitive. The boundaries, from personal experience, networks are there to drive change. They are there to work with employees and also other kind of business functions, whether it be in construction, health and safety, or whether it be sort of the HR functions. But one of the key challenges is actually not to overstep the mark. They might have a point whereby things need to change, but if you're having to overcome certain cultural norms, then that element, what they're trying to change, it might actually, the organisation might not want that. And as sad as that might sound, that can actually also be, one of like the barriers in which an organisation and networks are likely going to face. So there will be certainly some clashing of, minds, shall we say. I guess one of the other challenges for networks is that it's mostly made up of volunteers. So unless it is purely their job to run a network, then they're going to have to kind of make that time up somewhere along the line. And that's going to also be challenging for further people who are, I guess, further up the food chain in an organisation. How much time can they devote to a network? So how do people essentially manage their time and their workloads, and as well as all their personal stuff, to kind of give the dedication that a network requires, can also be challenging, because again, people will be in different time, perhaps different time zones, different routines. So getting to people together is somewhat of a challenge. But I guess two of the key sort of challenges, depending on how you sort of view networks, is that some members might be only interested in their particular area, and they can often be seen as somewhat exclusive. Now, what it sounds like Fujitsu have got, which I think is absolutely brilliant, is that there's a lot of cross-collaboration in terms of the employment networks. And if you have a central point of contact to manage all 4 networks, then you're going to have, certainly, kind of alluding to the top, a lot of less conflict, a lot of cross-collaboration, and actually where it might be seen as divisive, actually it starts bringing everything together into one kind of inclusive sort of set of networks. I mean, there's someone, and a couple of slides ago, there's someone who I know who actually got their job through starting the network within the organisation, and got their job opportunity actually because of that, and they now manage 16 different networks, which is absolute madness. That's on top of their day job, so fair play to them, to be honest. But I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts on what values do you believe that employee resource groups can add to an organisation, and what considerations do you believe should be made? So I'm open to sort of hearing what your thoughts are on employment resource groups, personal experience or otherwise.
One of the problems that I found is that they can actually be seen as whinge groups. They're always pointing out what's wrong in relation to their identity. And what I've found is the way to overcome that is that they have an all-round approach. In other words, they don't just deal with issues for employees who are in that particular identity group, but they deal with other stakeholders. So they look at how they serve customers who are in that particular identity, or suppliers, and so forth. And I think that really makes them appear that they're really contributing to the performance of the organisation, which I think is very beneficial.
Yes, I think especially if I take Barclays as a really good example of what employee networks have done. They've looked at it's the customer experience, and I think whether people necessarily like it or not, businesses are here to essentially generate money, and at the forefront of that is the clients. So if the client has a good experience, and that's actually been derived out of employees' input, then that also will make the employee feel that they've contributed to their client's experience, but it also supports their own experience within an organisation. So that is definitely a massive area which they are certainly beneficial and they add value.
Go for it. Barry?
Yeah, I was just going to say, from me, it would be due diligence and quality assurance as well. Initially, and from my experience taking on the portfolio about 5 years ago, there was an initial reluctance to kind of look outside of the employee welfare role. But I think what we were able to recognise, and that's the networks as well as myself, is the value that they have in that subject matter expertise, actually being able to add value to how we run the organisation. So a good example would be from a policy writing perspective. You know, if someone's going away and writing a policy on sickness absence as a great example, there's a whole kind of network, and disability specifically, but actually other networks that can really give a great input there. We weren't using that subject matter expertise for quite a long time until we pointed out there's a whole resource here that actually we're ignoring. But also that kind of how that plays out operationally. I don't think you were here at the time, but I work in policing. So from a community cohesion, community engagement perspective, you know, how we engage with those vulnerable communities in particular, how we promote our anti-hate crime campaigns. You know, actually these are the subject matter experts that we should be going to, rather than having these kind of, depending on the pips or the, you know, the badge that you've got, you know, I'm the most senior person in the room, but I still happen to be white and male. We recognise that actually you're not likely, even though you've got the experience, to have that subject matter expertise. But where the balance is, and this is where some of the frustrations are, is that what then are they? Are they an employee support network, or are they some kind of advisory group? And can the two sit together side by side? I don't think that's just a question.
Yeah, and I think that certainly varies from organisation to organisation, and I think in my experience, everyone kind of wants, you know, certainly the same thing, you know, and the benefits of providing support that drives down absenteeism and workplace adjustments for anybody, you know, just that simple conversation, you know, it doesn't make a difference if you're a marshal or whatever, it really doesn't make a difference. The ability to have that conversation and be supported so that you can just do your job and have a pleasant experience within the workplace is, I think, one of the best, you know, one of the best things that like an employee network can be. And it's actually knowing that you can go to somebody and actually have that conversation.
And also it links into what you about the terms of reference. What is the aims of the network, the objectives, and that's where people need to get it right, don't they? Right at the beginning. How's it going to link into the D&I strategy? How's it going to link into overall work? And I think that is where that has to be. Because some people just not knock them up, but do you know what I mean? Don't think carefully about when they're actually writing what the term of reference, what's it going to do, and having that proper governance structure as well, in terms of the whole reporting, what happens as well.
From the very outset,
exactly.
Yeah, it's about managing those expectations.
Exactly.
Yeah, you're right.
And when you talked about, Ian, you mentioned at the beginning about, you know, it can be classed as a moaning shop, for example. I've seen that happen where it's gone a bit wrong, where they were set up by somebody we talked about earlier, who was brilliant, really enthusiastic about it. They've gone off, there's been no governance, nobody's overseeing them, they're just going off in a silo doing their own thing. And then when the centre want to then link them back in, they're like, well, sorry, you weren't there for us before, we want to do our own thing. And it's trying to build those relationships. I've worked in organisations like that where they've gone off and there's no linkage, and the whole governance hasn't been done correctly, and that's when it can all go a bit wrong. And trying to build those relationships back and bring the engaging, bring them all together and be inclusive, that can be tricky sometimes.
And I think governance is a massive thing. If you're after any kind of I guess sort of research on networks, there's a gentleman called Rob Cross who's written some articles on Mick Sloan, and governance is a massive key. Policy, I guess, and this is going back sort of 2.5 years ago, I didn't necessarily see at the time the importance of policy, but policy is really the underpinning, I think, starting point for driving behaviour change. I think, and that's where you can also get accountability, certainly from management. But to get good policy change and something good, something that's accurate, it also has that kind of that feed-in element from people who have that lived experience, draw upon that data, but write it in a way that is balanced enough that supports the employee, but also, you know, supports the organisation. Sorry.
Roland, do you have a question?
Yeah, not so much a question.
Yeah.
So I'm I guess in the lucky or the unfortunate position of having seen this from both sides of the fence. So I was diversity policy officer at the Foreign Office,
Yeah.
but I was also chair of the Disabled Staff Network.
Yeah.
I was chair of the Disabled Staff Network, got the job as policy officer, and was told I couldn't do both because of conflict of interest.
Okay.
As policy officer, I held the budgets for all the different network groups. Once that job had finished, I then went back and became chair of the staff network again. But there is this issue of intersectionality.
I've written that book, yeah.
So as a gay man, but a gay man with a disability, I was told you can't belong to both the gay network and the disability network. You've got to prioritise.
Oh dear.
You
That's
only
ridiculous.
focus on one thing. I'm a man, I can only focus on one thing at a time.
Dear.
So I chose the disability network because it's kind of more important to me. But one thing that we found very useful in the Foreign Office was actually having board champions.
Yeah.
So there was a champion
definitely.
for each of the networks, and that gave us a direct conduit to the board. And once those board champions were in place, people were much more interested in becoming part of the network because they felt their voice would go straight up the top. What we also found was that this was pre-austerity days, so if you had network meetings at lunchtime, sandwiches were provided, and more people would turn up.
It's true. It's true.
Once no sandwiches
That's
provided,
true.
civil service.
They're all roll up.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it's totally true.
Yeah.
One thing that we did find, I was chair of the staff network when Cordell versus the Foreign Office was happening. Those of you may be aware of the fallout from that. And as a result of that, the deaf community within the Foreign Office totally sort of absorbed into itself, wouldn't engage with the wider disabled community, wouldn't engage with the rest of the Foreign Office. And that was a tragedy, basically. And that's because it was all badly managed, not part of the show.
Obviously not Roland.
But management just didn't interface. They took a decision, that was it. They weren't going to budge on it.
And it's like I say, it's the whole relationship building, isn't it? Like we said, if it's gone a bit wrong partway through that process, that's it's just building that.
The reputational damage to the Foreign Office has been immense.
I hope they've changed their view now in terms of you can only just have one.
They have progressed somewhat, but I wouldn't say they're kind of now in the 19th century or in the 20th century.
Okay, a little bit of a push forward. And also I think as well, when you mentioned about board, and it's really important because, for example, in an organisation I used to work, you had to report up to the board what was happening with the networks. So it wasn't about the networks when I did the own. So I think that's really important as well, that they have that board commitment.
That senior sort of buy-in is really important. So when we look at the key learnings, and it's really just actually, pretty much epitomising everything that's been said here. So understand your starting position. Obviously, different organisations are in different points at different, times, and this will also depend on the context and the industry in which they are also operating in. So really understanding your organisation is certainly paramount, and very much alluding to your point, that top end sort of upper echelon kind of buy-in is so paramount, because if you really want something to be said, heard or taken seriously, then you really need that board or C-level.
Can I just say, Greg, though, the way that it was done at the Foreign Office was that board members were allocated a group to be chair of.
Okay.
So you may not necessarily get a champion who understood, empathised or supported the board.
Yeah, and I can completely get it, because it might be a case of, well, that's a diversity network, we're just going to give that to the director of HR or something like that, because that's kind of an HR-y sort of thing to do. So again, that kind of goes certainly back to the challenges and having someone who has that, they have to believe in it as well. Otherwise it just becomes a tick box exercise, and I do completely get your point, hello.
So talking about your sponsorship there, one thing that has kind of worked within Fujitsu and other organisations is if you can get that sponsorship at board level, and if you have some sort of transitions and it's only for a certain period of time, you can almost create some sort of competition where that that leader that wants to sort of try and outdo the one beforehand. And if you can kind of get that momentum up, and it is a challenge, but if you can get that engagement and you can get that up, then you can almost get even more engagement.
But there are employee networks that I think are seen to be sexier than others, and disability is always right at the bottom of the list of sexiness.
And that's why they're competitive as well. But I think in terms of when you look at it, like understanding your organisation, your starting point, and looking at if you want to get starting out as an employment network, then if you understand someone who's going somewhere, it's maybe about perhaps using power and influence to kind of look at that's a person that's going somewhere. It's going to look good for them, so it's having that discussion about also trying to sell it as well. Really kind of use your connections within your organisation.
Greg, one thing that's happening over the last few years is the encouragement of allies, and this is something which we've not touched upon at all. Personally, I think it's a very positive development. But what do you see it as in terms of key learnings?
In terms of what the external allies?
These would be allies within the organisation. So, in other words, straight people are allies of the LGBT network and go to the LGBT network meetings.
That's it, and I completely agree with you. As in, you don't necessarily have to belong to a particular group to be part of that affinity group. You just someone. I'm very much open-minded to talk to anybody about anything, and if I had all the time in the world on top of my day job, then I'd be involved in networks all across.
Like you say, allies make a difference. Probably 10 years ago, it was very much about which protected characteristic you were part of. But now I think everybody understands that it's allies make a difference. Any sort of campaign, you think even civil rights, LGBT rights, it wasn't just the people of that community who actually helped it move forward. It was the allies. Allyship is really key. So yeah, definitely. I think in any network now, years ago, we used to have I remember it used to be you have to be from that community or that's it. Now people understand that actually you're open, you could be an ally, you can actually be part of any network. So there has been a shift in that, hasn't there, over the years in terms of how people think about allies. So add that in down in you see, psych.
I agree, and it kind of overcoming that initial challenge of it's I guess everyone's kind of like this is our kind of little group, but moving past that and having that allies, it also helps spread the word really, and break down the barriers elsewhere across in organisations and culturally as well. Again, getting organised. Governance structures, not just a governance structure, but having a structure within your network. If you allocate key roles, hold people into account, then they're going to get on with the job. You can't spread yourself too thin in an organisation, in any kind of network. And telling stories, really. We've all got our sort of our yammers and all of our sort of intranets and. Social media is part of that story, part of that really kind of storytelling sort of narrative. I mean, there will be some who are more confident in terms of sharing that story, but once other people see you sharing that story, then others will follow. And I certainly am a firm believer in that. And these are, the key finds of, Kate Nash's networkology. But are they the be all and end all? I guess my attitude is that in an ideal world, we wouldn't necessarily need them. Actually, we would be able to just sit down as a person to person and just have a conversation about anything. We wouldn't necessarily see difference. We would kind of accept each other for really who we are. And that would be, and that's my own personal view, but ultimately, the way in which society has evolved probably over the past 100 years, it is defined by, I guess, what's seen as the male pale and stale kind of culture, and anything that's kind of different is that. And I'm a white dude, so but they do serve as that kind of sort of starting point. In order for everyone to kind of integrate, understand difference, and really appreciate diversity and inclusion in the workplace. They do form that kind of place for people to start that change, and that is really, I think, that in 100 years' time, we don't know where we'll be with networks. Maybe we won't have them. I don't know, but at this moment in time, the movements across the protected characteristics and other kind of associated groups, they do form that important space for people to really voice. What it is that they feel. Sorry,
I was going to say, do you want people to bring themselves to work fully though? I mean, this is one in straplines that we use, you know, bring yourself, be completely you, but, you know, do you want people, it's always within the constraints of the business, it's what's agreeable. You know, if I start putting Nazi symbols up, someone's going to get really upset. You don't want me to bring that to work, so I can't bring my whole self to work if that's how I feel. So, you know, it's that constraint.
That's a good point.
So, you know, it's is it really that what you want people to bring themselves to work, and is there a line?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose the line is, does it meet the ethos of the organisation? Does it meet your diversity inclusion? You know, what your message you are trying to, you know, implement, the culture you're trying to implement, really. But yeah, that's a good point. Thanks for that. Thanks very much. Oh, sorry, you were finished, weren't you?
No, I was all I was going to say really is like in terms of, I guess in terms of like my own journey. When I was in the Navy, really, and I can hear like the Village People songs going around your head, things were rough. You know, we worked in terrible conditions, and being away from your friends and your family, and you know, there's this whole kind of myth around like, you know, we don't talk, but actually the amount that we did talk to each other about our problems meant that, you know, we were in the same boat. And I think everyone in this room, you know, is in somewhat the same boat in terms of like their journey and their attitudes, you know, towards diversity and inclusion. And you know, I'd spent 16 years there, and that was all I'd known. And I come into the real world, and things were completely different. And I must have spent it was a good year where I just did not have like really the confidence to actually talk about like the fact that I was losing my eyesight. I was adjusting to many like different things, organisational politics and all of this sort of stuff, and there was no one really to talk to. But then it was through employment resource groups that I had a sort of conversation with somebody, and I said, "Oh my God, somebody got that. Great." And then after sort of feeling like there was nothing kind of sort of, I guess, wrong with me or something like that, you know, actually it's okay to have these kind of feelings, that's when I just started talking openly about what it's like to really live with sight loss. Even as my journey has sort of evolved and I've still continued to sort of lose my sight, it's, you know, that talking is a cathartic process, really, and getting all of them sort of emotions off, you know, out is actually a real positive. And it I did some research for my MSc, and I guess like disability confidence, it's a journey. You know, there is no set point in time. You are going to get knockbacks. You are going to really, you know, encounter ignorance, and it's how you kind of really sort of deal with that ignorance at the time and try and maybe educate each other in a non-patronising way. I don't really know what the answer is. This is just what people from my research essentially said in terms of their careers and what they'd experienced. But my journey would not have really been what it was without employment research groups and Purple Space, really. And that's not me selling it. It is actually how I genuinely sort of feel about employment resource groups, despite an air of cynicism. That's actually how I feel.